Thanks for joining me for the first review on the Chronicles in Collecting channel, where we're going to be exploring the Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway movie that was just released. So this movie came out in June 11th in Japan and is scheduled to come out on July 1st on Netflix in the rest of the world. Fortunately, in Japan, if you go see the movie in theaters, you can buy a Blu-ray copy of it, and I was able to get a Blu-ray copy from someone who saw it in Japan, which is why I got to watch it earlier than Netflix has it up. This movie is a continuation of sort of the original Mobile Suit Gundam plotline started by Tomino in Mobile Suit Gundam that continued to Zeta, Double Z, and Char's Counterattack. This movie is based on, it's the first movie in a trilogy, and it's based on a series of novels called Hathaway's Flash, which were written by Tomino, though my understanding is that he did not have any direct involvement in the movie other than it's obviously based on his novels. And I think it's important to sort of keep in mind that it's a series of novels that were written 1 year after Char's Counterattack came out in theaters, or at least that's when the novels were released. I don't know when they were actually written. And Char's Counterattack and Hathaway's Flash, there's a 12-year sort of in-universe gap in between those two works. But it's important to realize that between 1989 and today, there's been a lot of evolution, in Gundam, and there's also been a lot of stuff that's happened in Universal Century, and sort of specifically things that have happened in that period between when Char's Counterattack happens in Universal Century and Hathaway happens. So I think that's maybe starting to hint at some of the issues that I had with the movie, although I did overall enjoy it. So let's start off with just sort of like a brief synopsis of the movie. This is going to be going to have spoilers in it. I will have a timestamp at the end where I have sort of my final thoughts, on the movie. So first, let's just kind of get a general idea of the plot. So in Char's Counterattack, obviously we have Amuro and Char kind of having their final face-off. The Axis colony being dropped onto Earth, and that's being prevented, and Char and Amuro being killed. I think, technically killed in action, or missing in action in the movies, confirmed killed in the novels, but effectively they are dead. And Hathaway Noah, who is the son of Bright Noah, which is sort of the main captain on the White Base, which is the main the main ship in the original Gundam, and has sort of served as a father figure and mentor to all of the Gundam pilots in Universal Century. Maybe neglected his own son a little bit, and I think that's sort of why they got Hathaway involved in that. He winds up kind of falling in love with this young woman who's kind of in a love triangle with Hathaway and this woman Quest Pariah. And Char, which, sort of leads to him getting involved into the story, and Quest winds up dying, and this sort of weighs heavily, on Hathaway. This story, like I said, picks up 12 years after that, and Hathaway is on a, kind of this very exclusive, chartered ship that's, going to Earth. And it has a lot of Earth Federation higher-ups, as well as the new captain of this base in Australia. They're attacked by terrorists, and we find out that these terrorists are from a new group called Mafti. And although the characters on the plane don't know this, but Hathaway is sort of the puppet master behind the scenes, who is kind of calling all of the shots. So I think that's sort of the vague beginning of the plot. Sort of in the middle half of the movie, sort of Hathaway is able to stop this terrorist attack. He is introduced to some of these new characters, Kenneth, who's the commander, and Gigi, who is this young lady that he meets on the ship, and kind of saves from this terrorist attack, and they become close. And she sort of unclear what her deal is. They pretty heavily imply that she's a new type. She kind of sees right through Hathaway's Hathaway's cover, and that he's really the leader of this terrorist organization. And then the rest of the movie is basically Hathaway trying to trying to get back in contact with his organization, sort of leave these two behind, and get back to the original mission that he was intended to go on. There's not a lot of Gundam battling. There's not a lot of kind of action in this movie. There is a really cool sort of mission set piece at the end, but this is really, as the name implies, Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, this is really an exploration of Hathaway Noah, sort of who he is and how his mind works and how he gets himself into these situations and how he tries to get himself out of these situations. So again, it's more of like a psychological analysis of his mind. It really reminds me more of almost like a Christopher Nolan movie than what we typically expect from a Gundam movie. I think, as you could probably tell from how I'm kind of crouching the movie, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I think it's a good movie. Let's go through some of the pros and then we'll go through some of the cons. I think the pros is it does a really good job of the character development, right? Hathaway Noah is not a character who's really been explored in a lot of the Gundam lore. So it's really interesting to kind of get to know him a little bit better, and I think the movie does. So it's really interesting to kind of get to know him a little bit better, and I think the movie does a really good job of making you care about him without giving us any of the characters that we would expect in a Universal Century continuation. I think that the animation, kind of as always, Bandai brings their A game to movies, and OVA's animation is excellent. The sound design is awesome. The music is really good. All the noises that the suits make. The sound mix I thought was incredible. It was a DTS HD Master Audio Mix 7.1. I watched it on my surround sound. Definitely. I read online. The only thing I read before I watched the movie was crank up the volume. Definitely agree with that. Gundam is not typically a series that I would praise for its sound mixes and sound designs. This definitely breaks that. So yeah, from a technical level, I think it was really good. From a movie perspective, the movie was really good. It made you care about the characters. It had an interesting plot. It kept my attention. The movie's about an hour and a half long, and there was no point in the movie where I was, my mind was wandering, or I was, trying to figure out, how much longer till this thing is over. I didn't have, I didn't get up to get a snack or go to the bathroom or anything like that. I was definitely glued to my seat. But, so that kind of leads into the cons. Obviously this takes place 12 years after Char's counterattack. There's a lot of characters who we really don't know what they're up to. Obviously Amuro and Char are no longer alive, but Bright Noah is still around. A lot of the original crew members from the White Base are still around. A lot of the characters from Zeta and Double Zeta Gundam are still around. Judo, Camille, and a lot of the other pilots. This movie focuses just on Hathaway. It does not talk about what any of the other characters are up to. We really don't. There's one throwaway line that Bright Noah is still in the army, but we don't know sort of what his role is or what he's doing, what his relationship with Hathaway is. On top of that, I think more importantly is that the movie, it does give some hints, mostly through, kind of like news shows that are playing in the background, or like a newspaper or magazine that somebody's reading, or some advertisements in the background as to sort of just what's going on in the Universal Century, what's going on on Earth, what's going on in the colonies, what is the situation, what's the relationship between Earth and the colonies? How have things changed in the 12 years, since Char disappeared? Have there been other skirmishes? Is there Zeon remnants who are still around? Were there any more wars? The movie does not talk about, any of that. I think that psychologically it follows up from some of Hathaway's plot threads from Char's counterattack, and just sort of his interaction with women, and how maybe he gets very easily thrown off of his plans when there's a pretty girl in his view. But there's not any kind of storyline progression from the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and through that whole line. Another thing that I was really worried about going into this movie is, like I hinted at before, this novel came out in 1989, which was 1 year after Char's counterattack. But in the interim, there's been other material that has come out that takes place in between when Char's counterattack happened and when Hathaway's Flash happened. And notably, that is Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn and Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn Narrative, which took place in 0096, which predates Hathaway's Flash. In the timeline, obviously not in when it was actually written. And this movie, it's as if Gundam Unicorn never happened. There's no mention of it. There's an article that someone's reading in the newspaper about, is this the second coming of Char and all this jazz? But people are still apparently talking about Char's counterattack from 12 years ago, but no one's talking about any of the events of Unicorn or the big revelations that happened at the end of Unicorn that really should have had a major impact in how the world works, just because of secrets that got out and things that were revealed. So in a way, the Hathaway movie just sort of reduces the importance of Gundam Unicorn, because it seems like here we are in universe about 10 years later, and it's like it never even happened. So who cares? Obviously, as far as I know, and as far as I've not read ahead. I don't know what happens in novels 2 and 3, but and I obviously don't know what's going to happen in the other 2 movies, and maybe they'll pick up some plot threads or at least acknowledge that Unicorn happened. But as of right now, a lot of the characters from Unicorn are still alive. Many of, including most notably Bright Noah, who's Hathaway's dad. Many of them should still be involved. On the stage, on the political stage of Universal Century. So that's basically one of my main complaints. I was really concerned they were just going to ignore that, because obviously the original novel doesn't address any of those things. I was hoping they would add some of that in, or maybe bring some of those characters in, which they have not. Maybe they will in 2 and 3. But obviously it's not looking good. And then the last thing, the last kind of con of this movie, in my opinion, is just sort of the lack of big action set pieces. I'm not one of those people where it's like every Gundam show has to be flashing lights and cool robots fighting. Obviously, that's a cool part of Gundam, but we're really, you're probably more than 2/3 into the movie before you really see any battling. And there's one really cool battle at the end, but it's very dark. You can't quite see what's going on, and I feel like it's over very, very quickly. On a side note, as far as I know, there's not a 4K Blu-ray of this, and I'm not sure as of when I'm filming this if Netflix is going to air in 4K or 1080p, or even if there's a 4K of this at all. But I would love to see a high dynamic range HDR or Dolby Vision cut of this movie, because I think that in all those scenes that have all of just like the really, it's really dark, it's happening at night, I think being able to have some adjusted brightness for that would make things a lot more interesting, a lot more visually interesting. So yeah, so I guess those are kind of my, and if anyone's interested, the Penelope Gundam is in the movie. They released a bunch of new figures for it. We'll be doing unboxings of that when it comes out in a few months. And the She Gundam does make an appearance at the end, though again, it's very dark. You don't quite see everything, but you do see those new mobile suits. I don't know sort of what the rest of the trilogy has in store. There's going to be 3 movies, presumably 1 movie corresponding to each one of the books. And I don't know when the next movie is going to come out, but it's definitely going to be too soon. And it is a Gundam animated project, so there's a pretty good chance that there winds up being more added to this, like with Origin and Unicorn, where they originally started off. I think Unicorn was originally 5 or 6 episodes, and then it moved up to 7, and Origin was something similar. Also, generally speaking, in the movie, again, you have this psychological analysis of Hathaway, and he's second guessing himself, and some of the other characters are maybe trying to talk him out of some of his actions. But we really don't have the makings of a plot, right? We're 1/3 of the way through this trilogy. And like I said, could be more perhaps, but right now I know there's only going to be 3 movies, an hour and a half, so that's 4.5 hours, and we're 1/3 of the way through that, and it's very unclear to me what the plot is, right? It's like, well, we have some people who are bad guys, I guess, and we have some people that are good guys, I guess. and they're going to be fighting, but what are they fighting over? What do they want? Is there going to be a specific weapon they're going to be fighting over, a specific battle, someone they're trying to save, someone they're trying to kill? Is this going to be more of just like a philosophical debate, which is kind of all that happened in this first episode? So that's just kind of a concern I have about the series going forward. I think as a standalone movie, if you go in there expecting, hey, this movie is called Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, it's going to be about Hathaway Noah, I'm going to learn about him, I'm going to, maybe learn to like him more as a character than I did in Char's Counterattack, then yeah, you're definitely going to get a lot out of this movie. If you're going to this movie and you want to say, hey, what is the state of the Earth Sphere in Universal Century, 12 years after Char's Counterattack, you're not going to get that. If you're going to say, hey, I want to see what happens after Gundam Narrative and Gundam Unicorn and the kind of repercussions of the ends of those series, you're not going to get that either. And if you want to say, hey, I want to watch a bunch of awesome Gundam battles, you're also not going to get that. This is going to be the non-spoiler portion of the review that I'm going to kind of I'm going to link to at the end for people who don't want to be spoiled by the movie. Overall, I would say that the character development in this movie is really good. I would give that, probably a 9 out of 10. The action I would not give very high, probably, like a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10. The plot is really not existent at this point. Again, it's more of like a character piece, and it reminds me more of sort of like more of like a Hollywood movie than a Gundam movie. And the last thing that I did want to talk about is just the sort of the visual direction. I think that if you watch the original Mobile Suit, Gundam, Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta Gundam, all that kind of stuff, you feel like you're in the future. And obviously some of that is that it happens in space. And most of this movie doesn't really take place, really none of this movie takes place in space. But it just feels like it's our world. The technology is kind of technology we would have. The people there basically are using like iPads and video conferencing. The planes that they're flying are very similar. The hotel that they're in and the elevators, it's basically just, it's like if you filmed our current world and you had a few Gundams fighting in it. And even the opening scene, which again, I don't want to get into spoilers, but it's just something that could happen in our world, which I think kind of, it's interesting in one sense because I think that the movie is trying to say something a little bit more relevant to current events. And I don't know if that's, by design or not. This movie was originally slated to come out last year and it got delayed numerous times. So I couldn't say for sure. But it seems more like it's taking place in our world and not in, Universal Century, not, probably hundreds and hundreds of years from now. Anyway, I would still encourage everyone to check out the movie. Obviously, if you're subscribed to Netflix, you could just watch it for free. It's, it's an hour and a half. It's an interesting movie. Join the discourse. Leave a comment or something. I'd be curious to see what other people are saying about the movie, especially once it, kind of hits the wider internet on July 1st. I would probably overall give it maybe like a 6 out of 10. I'd put it at the kind of below average Gundam. For me, probably in my lower B tier. Probably at some point I should do a Gundam kind of tier episode. And I would also say that, my rating could change, especially if the second and third movies maybe address some of my criticisms and sort of provide a really excellent payoff for the strong character development we got in the first movie. That's certainly possible, but for now I'm going to leave it at a 6 out of 10. Thanks so much for watching this review. If this is your first time visiting the channel, check out some of the other videos. We do a lot of figure unboxings and try to, both Gundam and other robot shows, try to give a little bit of a primer for people that might not be familiar with every different show that I'm reviewing. New episodes go up every Wednesday, and actually the next episode that's going to be going up is going to be talking about Gundam Stardust Memory and the Gundam GP02A. And we're also going to be sneaking in a probably another video where we're going to take a look at this Chogokin Hello Kitty themed Gundam, which I'm really excited to take a look at because it seems like it's going to be a lot of fun. So please join me for those videos. Thanks so much, and keep collecting.